My grandfather received the news at 12 o'clock that day. He closed his doctor's office and sent everyone away. He rushed straight home and gathered all the clothing he could pack. He took me with him on the train that went to Halifax. We were among the 100 souls to crowd into the car. I was the only child allowed, seated at the bar. We waited for the blankets to be loaded in the back, still unprepared for what we'd see when we reached Halifax. I asked my granddad doctor why it was he was so sad. He turned his face away from mine and said, "You'll understand." I pieced the truth together as I overheard the facts. There was a great disaster had befallen Halifax. Oh, the year was 1917, in the First Great War. Two ships collided in the Narrows and drifted into shore. With thousands drawn to see this thing, they blew up with such might. Near half the city was destroyed in a fireball of light. Hundreds then were blinded by glass and by debris. A tidal wave, it swept away some who died instantly. That night the heavens tried to hide the horror of this show, as the city smoldered underneath a brand new foot of snow. When we arrived in Halifax, a cloud hung in the air. The oil, the fire, the flesh, the flood, the stench was everywhere. Grandfather took me to a church where the wounded lay and said, "God has given us a work in Halifax today." And I still recall the children, now they were orphans, who were without homes and parents, and so close to Christmas too. After 7 days we packed our bags and hurned and headed home, as relief poured into Halifax from Boston and beyond. Now the many years that have since passed have not dimmed memory. The horror of that awful scene is still so fresh to me. But the people of the Commonwealth asked for nothing back when they went north to help rebuild the port of Halifax. And now each year when Christmas comes, it all comes back to me. They set the Nova Scotia spruce for everyone to see. My daughter's daughter sits upon my shoulders, and she claps when Boston's Christmas tree is lit, a gift from Halifax. Then joyful voices carry out our carols to the skies. Thousands gather every year, but most can't tell you why. So many can't remember what so many can't forget. And the Halifax disaster is commemorated yet. It's the Halifax disaster we will not forget. Now, the postscript. I wrote that song almost 20 years ago now. And after a trip that my wife Mary and I made to Nova Scotia, to the Maritimes, we often have done that, to go up to Cape Breton and then over to the ferry across to Newfoundland. And that has become such a big part of our lives that we can't really shake it. But on one occasion, we went to Halifax, and I think it was because the Titanic movie was out, and we wanted to see some of the artifacts in a place called the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. But I got sidetracked. I don't remember seeing anything from the Titanic in that place, because I got sidetracked immediately to this display about something called the Halifax disaster. I had no idea what this was. And this was unusual as I began to discover the enormity of this event, because my mother, who is devoted to the education of history, as was my father, had never said anything about this. And I couldn't ever recall my father's parents ever saying anything about it either. And that would have been very, very unusual. And I suppose it was because it was something that they knew but had possibly forgotten. But it came as such a shock to me. And at that point, my folk music radio career, such as it was gone. But I learned a lot of music in that time, and I couldn't remember. And I was becoming very, very familiar with the kind of average, not average, but the kind of repertoire that came from Atlantic Canada. And I couldn't recall any songs that had talked about this. So I wanted to take because it's a huge story, and trying to compress it into a song, you really need a very, kind of a minuscule, very particular point of view. And I tumbled onto that one day, and then the song came tumbling out. So that was good. Nowadays, it's practically a cottage industry to write songs about the Halifax disaster. I'm not going to claim that I was the first. Okay, I'm sure that's not true. I'm absolutely sure that that's not true. And actually, now I know it's not true, because I know of things that I did not know when I wrote the song. But now it's like everybody and his brother is writing songs about the Halifax disaster. And when Boston has its Christmas tree lighting ceremony, they sing them. And so anyway, I'll just leave that there. But it all comes back to me, this one song, and it's very precious to me. When I sang it in the South, when I sang it in like Florida and North Carolina, I sang it a couple of times out in Western North Carolina, and I got such a tremendous response, and a response not only to the song but also to, hey, how come I never heard of that? Well, now you have. And so I hope that the song has done its part in spiking interest in it. Anyone who's interested in the Halifax disaster should look up this book. And this is not a paid advertisement, but when this book came out, The Curse of the Narrows by Laura MacDonald. This book actually came out in, I think, 2005 or 2006. And I was very excited when it did. I was excited when it did because I wanted to be sure that I had my facts right. I had done a fair amount of research, and I wanted to be sure that I had the essential facts correct. And I mostly did. I haven't very often tried to write something as blatantly historical as that. But that time I did, and I was delighted that Laura MacDonald's book showed me that I had. So if you're at all interested, look up this book. It's called The Curse of the Narrows by Laura MacDonald, and it gives the whole story, the enormous story of the Halifax explosion. I hope you look that up. You can look in the comments, and you'll find a link there to the recording of that song on my album, The Northern Sagas. It's on Bandcamp, and so go listen to it or buy it even. That would be that would be delightful. I hope you have a good day, and thanks for listening.